Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar and podcast series, Israel Insider with Ashley Perry. I'm Stacey Roman, and I will be moderating this discussion today. We are pleased to have Mr. Ashley Perry, advisor to the Middle East Forum's Israel office, join us here each Wednesday at 3 p.m. Eastern to update us on all the events going on in Israel. Mr. Perry will be giving us a briefing on current Israeli affairs for 15 minutes, then open it up for questions. Should you wish to ask a question, please use the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen to type your question. And now, with no further ado, I'll turn the discussion over to Mr. Ashley Perry.
Thank you very much, Stacey, and good evening from Israel. As those of you who saw the invitation for this week's webinar will be aware, I had, again, I've spoken about this in the past, that usually I have to give a title for this webinar on a Saturday night or Sunday morning, and here we are Wednesday, and basically everything has changed. So I had intended to talk a little bit about Likud, about the future of former Prime Minister and leader of the opposition, Benjamin Netanyahu, and that certainly was where a lot of the noise was being made very earlier in the week or late last week. There seemed to be a lot of tension in the party. We saw, a growing discontent behind the scenes, or even for the first time with Yuli Edelstein's surprise announcement, really openly attacking Netanyahu and saying that, he has failed to form a government, only I could form a government, and saying things which a lot of other Likud senior members were saying behind closed doors. I always say to people, if you want to know where Netanyahu's standing is in the Likud, you just have to watch who is going to defend him in the main news programs, whether it's the radio or TV or whatever. And lately, we've only been seeing real backbenchers, really. No one in the top part of the list, of the Likud list, no one who really sees, a potential future in the leadership of the Likud, certainly is backing Netanyahu, and even some of those sort of a little bit further down, who one would think would be more likely to defend Likud. Just as I said, the people who are being sent to the major networks are really backbenchers, people who don't really make too much noise otherwise. There was a fascinating moment this week, really interesting, just to sort of show the mentality and the psyche of where Netanyahu is. During the Likud faction meeting on Monday, all the parties have faction meetings and they're usually open to the media, part of it behind closed doors. There was a recording of Netanyahu telling the rest of the Likud party members that he went for a haircut this week in his usual place in Likud, in Jerusalem, sorry. And after he came out, he said he was mobbed. He couldn't move. There were so many people. It was so good to see the support and whatever. And then someone released a recording of actually what happened. It's not clear exactly who it was, but there's someone recorded him coming out of said barbershop, and there was one or two people. He gave one person a fist bump. There were more security around him than anyone else. So it was a bit embarrassing for the Likud leader. So what did he do next day? He made sure that in a place where he knows he gets a lot of support, Jerusalem's Machane Yehuda market, it's usually a bastion of right-wing Likud support. And he ostensibly sort of just decided to go and get a falafel from the market. His car pulled up with all the security. He, took a few steps, went into a falafel shop, came out. Again, the interesting thing is, first of all, Netanyahu, who is a great student of American politics, that everything is well prepared in advance, had obviously called the media. I know some of the people in the media that they got this sort of just off the cuff, this decision to go to get a falafel in the market was obviously well prepared. The media had been prepared. They were there waiting, taking pictures. But again, if you look at the pictures, considering where he was, a foundational pillar of Likud support, especially in Jerusalem, again, he was not flooded. He had a lot of security around him. There were some people who wanted to shake his hands. There were some people taking pictures, but really nothing too exciting. So maybe it's starting to translate, his, let's say, perhaps his lack of support and the knives out for him in the Likud. Maybe it's starting to translate. Don't forget, this is a person who everyone associates with premiership. They've seen him for the last 13 years as a leader, and now he's, to a certain extent, a relatively weak opposition leader, because despite what he claimed that he'll be able to bring down this government pretty quickly, so far it doesn't look that way. What has happened, especially today, is the coalition seems to be doing everything possible to bring itself down. There have been really intense arguments within the coalition today. We saw, for example, Merav Michaeli of the Labour Party attack Defense Minister Benny Gantz. Don't forget, Benny Gantz is the person who claimed that he was going to be the new Yitzhak Rabin. This is what was reported when he met with Mahmoud Abbas, leader of the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. But Merav Michaeli and many on the left are incensed by the defense minister's conduct of late. First of all, there was the banning of 4 Palestinian quote-unquote human rights organizations with associations to PFLP, a Palestinian terrorist organization, which is a prescribed terrorist organization, not just in Israel, but in America. And it is well known in Israel, it's been an open secret for many years, that there are these human rights masquerading organizations which do have clear ties, whether it's through their membership, whether it's through other means, ties with some of these prescribed organizations. So for the first time, an Israeli defense minister who's in charge of these type of things decided that these organizations should be prescribed equally. It got a lot of attention around the world. The Americans claimed that they were taken by surprise by this. The Israelis said that they had warned them in advance, and the Americans again doubled down and said, no, we weren't given any information. It got to a point where Israel's now sent over some experts in this field to really give them all the different information. There seems to be a difference of opinion exactly whether the Israelis did update and up to what level, and did it get to the right people, or maybe the Americans didn't send it up to the higher levels. It's unclear, but the fact is it's something which incensed also the Europeans and the UN, but also the left-wing members of the coalition. This, in addition to recently released today, the passing of the final steps to create around 3,000 new homes in what's described as the settlement blocks, Israeli homes over the Green Line, 1,800 which have to go through the final phase, and 1,300 new tenders. And as you can imagine, that incensed, again, America. America used very strong language, probably the strongest language it's used since this new government. But the left, again, Merav Michaeli, the Labour Party, basically said, Benny Gantz is no Yitzhak Rabin, and he's, trying to pull this government apart. Then we had infighting within Yamina, extraordinary scenes. We had one member of Yamina basically say that finding institutions which are not, let's say, disabled, accessible, is something akin to communism. Or he has someone else in his party who is deaf, and basically she came out and said it's disgusting what he said, and it's offensive to the 1.8 million Israelis with some sort of disabilities. And they showed a WhatsApp conversation of members of Knesset Yamina, and the Yamina member basically left the group saying this party is a bunch of idiots. Naftali Bennett, when he should be worried about dealing with the budget and everything else, that goes on with being a prime minister, had to basically pull in his Yamina members and try and come to some sort of understanding and try and move it beyond them. But the biggest shock came out today. There were some leaked recordings of Ayelet Shaked, who's the interior minister and number 2 of Yamina, sort of to a certain extent Naftali Bennett's right hand, came out with recordings saying that Yair Lapid is a big problem. He keeps on making these diplomatic faux pas. But she also did say something which a lot of people in the coalition say regularly behind closed doors. They are worried that Gantz is just looking for an opportunity to blow up the coalition, and he's a problem. And also that she's not sure if there will be a rotation. The rotation is in 2 years after the beginning of the government, that Yair Lapid will become prime minister, take over from current prime minister Naftali Bennett. That was the coalition agreement. That was the understanding. And to have someone so close to Bennett be recorded as saying that, you can imagine, was a very problematic thing. Shaked called up Yair Lapid to apologize and to try and set the record straight. But as a lot of people pointed out, interestingly enough, she did not, as of now, call Benny Gantz to apologize or clear the air. It's clear that Benny Gantz is still seen as someone who could blow up the coalition. That is the view from a lot of people in the coalition itself. But what is really important is this week, at least, and certainly next week, the process for passing the budget really starts in earnest. And this is, as I've been saying for many, many weeks, this is really the test for this government. This, if it fails, the government falls, simply because it has until November 14th to pass the budget. There was extraordinary scenes this week of after the budget passed its first vote, it goes back to a committee, it goes back to the finance committee, and one of the opposition members on the committee handed in 22,000 queries on the budget. And the reason to do so is because they want to try and overload the discussion. They want to try and elongate it as much as possible to the point where the budget won't pass by November 14th. My understanding is that won't be a problem. They have a way of dealing with it. It's not that they're going to have to vote on all 22,000 or discuss them. And you could see the face of the head of that finance committee, Alex Kushner. He smiled. They even had a joke about it. This will be my bedtime reading, et cetera, et cetera. So he doesn't seem overly concerned. And being in the Knesset today, speaking with a bunch of people, MKs, ministers from the coalition and the opposition, not too many people believe that the budget won't pass. Most are confident. They still have a very slim majority of 61, which means anyone who votes against or abstains means that that particular part of the budget will not pass, and then have a big problem. What seems to be the biggest worry, extraordinarily, is the fact that what Likud and the opposition is planning to do, is starting to do, is make the sessions, the discussions on the budget, the votes in the plenum floor go on as long as possible, because what they're hoping to do, and last night they went all through the night. There were pictures from 5 o'clock in the morning, and speaking to all these members of Knesset, they said that this is going to go on for quite a few days and into next week. It's going to be day after day, no break. And what the opposition is hoping to do is replicate what happened, a month or so ago, when the Speaker of the Knesset, because it was what's called in Israel a Laila Lavan, a white night, in other words, a night without sleep in the Knesset, he made a mistake in his voting because he was so tired and there were so many votes and so much pressure and tiredness, exhaustion even. He voted the wrong way and a law did not pass. The timing of the budget is so tight, there is so much going on that one person votes incorrectly, the whole thing could fall apart. So that is the biggest worry, because you can imagine after 24-hour marathon sessions on the budget, and then you're being asked to vote on so many different issues, to remember how to vote each time. They say it's a remarkable thing when you think about it, but this seems to be the biggest hope of the opposition, is that the coalition will be so exhausted, so confused, so tired, that on one of the crucial votes, they could vote mistakenly. And the fact that the Speaker of the Knesset, Miki Levy, happened to do so a number of weeks ago gives them hope that maybe this could happen. So that's really the opposition's playbook over the coming weeks. As I said, there's pretty strong confidence within the coalition that the budget will pass. They have the numbers, barely. Again, it means every single person in the coalition has to vote together on every single issue, and basically be alert and ensure that they vote the right way, or this government could fall on such a minor thing as a mistaken vote. That's a remarkable thing, but that seems to be, at this point in time, the biggest worry from the coalition. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any questions on this or any other issues.
All right, thanks so much. Sounds like the coalition needs some more coffee. Uh,
Absolutely.
from Carrie Hillebrand, yesterday there was a vague coverage about an Israeli private jet landing in Saudi Arabia and a Saudi jet landing in Tel Aviv. What is known about the significance of this?
Not too much. They're really, the details are very slim, thin on the ground. We do know that a plane took off from Saudi Arabia, landed in Israel, and a private jet went in the other direction. The fact that it wasn't such a big deal probably really speaks to the growing ties between the two countries. They're not normalized yet. They don't recognize each other. They don't have diplomatic relations. But it's just another step, and added to the fact that Israeli planes and other planes can go over Saudi airspace, especially now to the UAE and other places. It just shows perhaps the normality of such a thing in this day and age, because if it had happened 10 years ago, you can imagine the international furore around such an event. But today, the fact that, yes, there were some headlines on it and there was a lot of interest. It's not clear exactly who was on these planes, or at least I'm not aware of it. But the fact that it was a vague interest, but not more than that, really shows the growing relations between the two nations.
Thank you. From Eric Selkov, what are your thoughts about Iran saying nuclear talks would begin again? Does this mean that Biden does not have a plan B?
I think it's clear, I mean, to me at least, that the reason Iran is suddenly coming back to the table is because of the pressure the last few weeks. Even today, a senior American administration official said, still every option is on the table. We prefer diplomacy, but we are not removing any other options. It's clear the rhetoric from the US, Israel, and others, the fact that Israel has been openly taking steps to prepare for these other options openly is putting a lot of pressure on them. The fact that the Americans are not playing ball, and the fact that Americans are putting a lot of pressure on Iran to return to the table. They're trying, and they have tried to put it off as much as possible. They had the elections and a new prime minister, hardline Raisi. There's only a certain amount that they could sort of dedicate to bedding in the new administration in Iran. But I think now that the pressure has been put on from multiple directions, I think the Iranians feel that they have to come back to the table. Now, what that means is a whole other thing. The Iranians are very good at delaying even when they're at the table. And don't forget, they're not having direct talks with the Americans. And what's clear is, while the Iranians have said that these talks, we're ready for talks in November, no one else has come out and said that these talks will happen. The Europeans, the Americans, even the Chinese and the Russians, who are more sympathetic towards Iran, have not confirmed this. So at the moment, Iran is just setting the deadline and the date for themselves, but no one else has agreed to attend as well. I think if Iran is ready, probably the talks will restart in Vienna at some point soon. But it's clear the fact that Iran are coming back to the table means that they are under a certain amount of pressure. I'm sure everybody's seen what's going on in Iran. There was cyber attacks, there was a lack of fuel, and don't forget, this is when Iran is supplying fuel to Lebanon, and that caused a lot of outrage. Iranian protesters were asking, where's our fuel got? You're giving the Lebanese people, what about us? And their currency is failing, the economy is faltering, so the Iranians are under a lot of pressure. So it's not altogether surprising they've taken this step, but we've seen in the past that Iran has returned to the talks, but that doesn't mean there's any movement forward in those talks.
Thank you. And for our viewers, we'll be having a longer webinar on November 5th, all about Iran's nuclear program. From Eric Selkov again, and we have quite a few questions coming in regarding the Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem. First off, what are your thoughts about Biden trying to push a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem? And why is Blinken so demanding for this to go through?
Well, first of all, there'll be someone far more expertise than me speaking about that also coming up at the beginning of November, Eugene Kontorovich. He's an expert in international law and to do with the Israel-Palestinian conflict. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in this issue staying tuned. In, what is it, 5 days? I think next Monday he'll be speaking about it. But there's all sorts of different opinions about it, exactly what it means, exactly what the intentions are. It's clear that the Americans want this win. Israel has to come on board, in theory at least, for practical measures. But Israel has been sending a message, especially the right-wing members, that they don't want this to happen. They don't think it should happen. And even some saying it won't happen. These are members of the government, obviously more on the right wing. It's become a very symbolic battle, what is relatively bureaucratic, or at least the Americans would argue it's a relatively bureaucratic step to reopen a consulate that would cater to the Palestinians. But again, it's now the world is different. The world has moved on since that consulate was closed. America has now recognized Jerusalem as the capital, the indivisible capital of the state of Israel. They've moved their embassy there. And now to open an embassy or a consulate or mission to another territory, another people, does, let's just say, lower that level of sovereignty, at least in a symbolic manner. So that's why a lot of the Israeli government, even the centrists, are against it. But the Americans are pushing hard because there's a lot of different ideas going around. Some that they want to downgrade the recognition of Jerusalem to a certain level. They know they can't go far enough and completely, return their embassy to Tel Aviv and, unrecognize Jerusalem. So maybe this is one good step they would feel towards the Palestinians, and downgrading what was a Trump policy of moving the embassy and recognizing Jerusalem. So that's probably, it's the Americans again would say that there are Palestinians, we have to have a consulate to deal with them. But the argument would be, why not have it in Ramallah, which is the seat of the Palestinian Authority? Why not have it in Abu Dis, which is the nearest town just outside the municipal boundaries of Jerusalem, which could easily cater to Palestinians in the Jerusalem area? But it does seem to be a fight which isn't going to take place until the budget is passed. That is a sort of understanding, but the pressure around it, the noise around it is not going away. And it doesn't seem like either side at this point are backing down. The Americans are intent, it seems, on opening up the consulate, but the majority of the Israeli government, obviously not the more left-wing members, but the center and the right are dead set against it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because as I said, there's two very different narratives surrounding it at this point.
Thank you. From Reuven Hawk, actually, regarding the budget. If the government passes its budget, do you think the Biden administration will then put much more pressure on Israel regarding the newly approved housing units in Judea and Samaria, the outlawed Palestinian NGOs, and the opening of the U.S. consulate for Palestinians in Jerusalem? Or will the Biden administration be afraid of bringing down the government?
I think we should separate those issues. As I said, the first two, there's been a lot of pressure. It's understood that Secretary of State Blinken had a very, had a lot to say to Defense Minister Gantz, because, as I said, in these issues, anything to do with the Palestinian Authority is the remit of the Defense Minister. And apparently Secretary of State Blinken made it very clear in very strong and forceful words, America's attitude towards the steps against the NGOs and on the building of the settlements, and left in no doubt, the Biden administration's unease with it. There has been some speculation that there's a difference of opinion in the State Department, which wants to take a far more hawkish line towards Israel, and the White House, which doesn't. Maybe it's good cop, bad cop. But there has been a lot more silence, or a lot more, let's just say, a different tone used by the White House than the State Department. The issue of the consulate, as I said, there is an understanding to bring that after the budget. I think, if just sort of from a personality point of view, probably the American administration, being that it's made up of so many people who worked under the Obama administration, certainly wouldn't like to see a return of Netanyahu. There's a lot of people who say the only thing that's keeping this government going on a day-to-day basis is the fact that Netanyahu is still there in the opposition. If he were to leave or be voted out, not that that's happening necessarily anytime soon, this government would fall, it would be broken up. Maybe that's also a principle which is governing US-Israel relations. Maybe there are certain people in the Biden administration who say we have our differences on policy and substance, but to bring this government down means there's a good chance of return to Netanyahu and the sort of so-called right-wing religious government. And so they have to tread carefully. Diplomacy is the art of the possible, and they have to take into account what's going on domestically. And they have to understand that, this is true of any diplomacy. You have to understand the ramifications for any event or any action or any statement or response, because there are ramifications. So I'm sure all of these things are being taken into account. But I think we'll see in general a lot more opening of issues, divisive issues within the Israeli government and possibly within the US-Israel relationship once the budget is passed. And there is a sense that there's a lot more stability afterwards.
And speaking of US-Israel relations, Joy Wolf asks, yesterday doubt was cast on the state of mind of President Biden. How do you see the future of Israel-American relations if he leaves, and what would this relationship be with the vice president?
With the vice president, Kamala Harris. I mean, I don't think anyone's really, I don't think there's anything, any plan in Israel to think about after Biden. Obviously, what happens in the American political system is for Americans to worry about. But Israel, Israel has a good relationship with Kamala Harris. Foreign Minister Lapid was there recently and had a good meeting. Kamala Harris, if you see her voting record, is pretty good on Israel. It's pretty strong. So I think that there's a lot of people in Israel who believe that she has a good understanding, despite some issues. There was that issue where she didn't respond to the person who accused Israel of apartheid and ethnic cleansing. There was a student event about voting rights. And remember, there was a Yemeni Iranian student who basically called Israel all manner of things, and she said, "You're welcome to your own opinion, and we should respect that." There was a lot of disquiet in Israel about that. But generally, Kamala Harris is liked in Israel. She has a good reputation. She has a good history of Israel's support. So, at the end of the day, it is a bit of a catchphrase. But for Israel, it's we've had good relations with Democrats. We've had good relations with Republicans. Sometimes there's a personality difference, even between a Republican and a right-wing Israeli prime minister, or left-wing with a Democrat. But on the whole, the relations go far beyond. It's beyond the administration. It goes to the American people's general support for the Jewish state. So Israel is not particularly worried about who should be leading the country, but should certainly and is paying attention to all the different forces within the various political parties.
Thank you so much. From Barak Korkmaz. Good evening, Mr. Perry. There's news on Israeli press about Iranian SAM batteries moved to Syria. Is this true? And if yes, does it remind you of the Russian SAM sites moving closer to the canal before Yom Kippur?
There's nothing particularly new in the fact that the Iranians are using Syria as a base to potentially threaten potential retaliation against Israel should it take any steps against the Iranian nuclear weapons capability. Israel has much better intelligence than it did back in the day. Israel knows exactly what's going on. I don't know the exact details of what is going on, but we have very, very good intelligence, and that's really witnessed by the almost daily sorties that are going over Syria from Israel, and the pinpoint attacks on various installations which are worrying and threatening Israel. So I think Israel's in a very different situation than it was back in the day when it was caught unawares. And so, not to say we're not worried. Of course, we are worried. about all these sort of developments, but Israel's in a pretty good place where it can react to events happening in Syria. But it certainly is a worry that Iran can, work so openly over there, and it's something to be monitored. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We've come to the close of our webinar and podcast. Ashley, thank you again for taking time to update us this
Thank
week.
you.
For our viewers, please join us Friday for an interview with Josh Mandel conducted by Benjamin Baird. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you have a great day.